The hot Manila afternoon enveloped the Pacquiao family residence, with its characteristic heat as Queen Elizabeth, Manny Pacquiao's daughter, organized some old belongings in the house's attic. Among dusty boxes and memories stored for decades, her fingers touched something unexpected: a worn leather notebook hidden behind a pile of yellowed photographs. The object seemed to have been deliberately placed there, away from curious eyes, as if it held secrets that time had made precious. The diary's leather was dried out by the tropical Philippine climate, its pages yellowed by time and humidity. Queen Elizabeth immediately recognized the irregular handwriting on the cover. It was her grandfather's writing, Rosalio Pacquiao, the man who had passed away when she was still very young. Her hands trembled slightly, as she realized she had discovered something intimate and personal, something her own father might never have known existed. Curiosity took hold of her as she carefully opened the first page, fearing the fragile paper might crumble between her fingers. The first words were written in ink that had faded, but were still legible. "For my son Emmanuel Sue, who will one day be great." Queen Elizabeth's heart raced as she realized she was holding the intimate words of a grandfather she had known only through fragmented stories and faded photographs. The silence of the attic was broken only by the distant sound of Manila traffic as she flipped through some pages, discovering that each entry was dated and written with touching care. They were reflections, prayers, dreams, and fears of a simple man who worked hard to support his family. The words revealed an emotional depth that contrasted with the image of the stern man she had imagined through the few stories she had heard. Queen Elizabeth gently closed the diary, instinctively knowing she had found something extraordinary. Her hands still trembled as she went downstairs, carrying with her not just a physical object, but the promise of discoveries that could forever change how her family understood their own history. The weight of the diary in her hands seemed disproportionate to its size, as if it carried decades of unexpressed love and wisdom kept in silence. Seated in her room, Queen Elizabeth opened the diary again with reverence, this time dedicating herself to reading each word carefully. The first entry dated from 1978, a year before her father's birth, and revealed young Rosalio's anxieties about becoming a father. He wrote about his fears of not being able to adequately provide for his family, about the hard jobs he faced daily, and about his dreams of giving the son who was coming a better life than his own. The following pages documented Manny's first years of life, written with the proud admiration of a father who saw extraordinary potential in his small son. Rosalio described how little Emmanuel showed uncommon determination from early on, how his small fists would clench tightly even when he slept, and how his eyes shone with an intensity that seemed to promise great things. Each observation was noted with an affection that showed through the simple and direct words. A particularly touching entry described the day when Manny, then only 5 years old, defended a smaller child from neighborhood bullies. Rosalio had witnessed the scene from afar and wrote about how his heart filled with pride, seeing that his son already demonstrated the courageous character that would later make him famous. He confessed in the diary that at that moment he knew Emmanuel was special, even though he still didn't know exactly how that specialness would manifest. The pages also revealed the financial difficulties the family faced, described with raw honesty that made Queen Elizabeth better understand her father's humble origins. Rosalio wrote about nights when he went to bed hungry so the children could eat, about rejected jobs and lost opportunities, but always maintaining an unshakable faith that better days would come. His words showed a man who transformed each difficulty into motivation to fight harder. Queen Elizabeth paused her reading when tears began to blur her vision. She was discovering a grandfather completely different from the distant man she had imagined, a man whose love for his family was so deep that he documented each precious, small moment. The diary wasn't just a personal record, but a love letter extended over the years, addressed to a son who might never get to read it. As she advanced in her reading, Queen Elizabeth discovered that her grandfather had begun having recurring dreams about Manny's future when the boy was only 7 years old. In a detailed entry from 1986, Rosalio described a vivid dream where he saw his adult son being celebrated by crowds, with people shouting his name in packed arenas. At the time, he had interpreted the dream as just the wishes of a hopeful father, but had decided to write it down anyway, as if sensing its future importance. The diary revealed that Rosalio had secretly begun saving pennies to buy boxing gloves for Emmanuel, even if it meant cutting essential family expenses. He wrote about how he watched his son playing at fighting with other children, and noticed there was something different about the way Manny moved, a natural fluidity and determination that seemed innate. Each small victory of the boy in neighborhood fights was documented with paternal pride and growing hope. A particularly moving passage described the day Rosalio finally managed to buy the first boxing gloves for Manny. He had worked extra shifts for weeks, carrying heavy bags at the Manila port under the scorching sun, just to gather the necessary money. In the diary, he confessed that his hands were so injured from the extra work that he could barely write, but that the joy on Emmanuel's face upon receiving the gloves had made every sacrifice worthwhile. Rosalio also documented his secret visits to local gyms, where he observed other young boxers training, trying to learn everything he could to later teach his son. He noted techniques he saw, strategies he heard trainers explain, and even small details about nutrition and physical preparation that he could apply within the family's financial limitations. Each page showed a man determined to give his son all possible tools for success, even if he had to discover these tools on his own. The entries from that period always ended with written prayers, simple but sincere requests for God to protect Emmanuel and guide him to the destiny Rosalio felt awaited him. He wrote about his faith, that boxing would be the bridge that would lift his son out of poverty, but also expressed fears about the sport's dangers and about his own ability to adequately guide a career that seemed beyond his experience and knowledge. The diary pages revealed a truth Queen Elizabeth had never fully known. Her grandfather hadn't abandoned the family for lack of love, but because of a devastating combination of circumstances that forced him to make impossible decisions. A 1992 entry showed Rosalio struggling with debts that had accumulated after he lost his main job at the port. He wrote about creditors who threatened the family and about how his presence was putting everyone in danger. The decision to leave had been documented over several anguished entries, where Rosalio described sleepless nights weighing his limited options. He had realized that Manny, then 13, already showed signs of becoming the man of the house, caring for his mother and siblings with a maturity that broke his paternal heart. In the diary, he confessed that he saw in his son a strength he himself didn't possess, and that perhaps his absence would allow that strength to flourish without the limitations of his own problematic presence. Even after leaving, Rosalio continued writing in the diary, documenting his desperate attempts to find work in other cities to send money home. He described temporary jobs in construction, on distant farms, anywhere that would accept him without asking many questions about his past. Each entry showed a man broken by separation from his family, but determined to make any necessary sacrifice to ensure they had a chance to prosper. The pages from this period were stained, probably by tears, and the handwriting became more irregular, reflecting Rosalio's deteriorated emotional state. He wrote about how he heard news of Manny's first boxing victories through mutual acquaintances, and how each of his son's successes was simultaneously a reason for immense pride and deep pain for not being present to witness personally. His words revealed a father who had chosen the supreme sacrifice, believing his absence would be better for Emmanuel's future than his problematic presence. Queen Elizabeth had to pause her reading, realizing she had judged her grandfather unfairly throughout her life. The pages showed not a man who had abandoned his family out of selfishness or weakness, but someone who had made the most painful choice possible, believing it was the only way to protect those he loved. Each written word was proof of love that transcended physical presence, a testament to a father who had never stopped loving or rooting for his son's success. During Manny's rise in boxing, Rosalio had found creative ways to follow his son's career, even from a distance. The diary showed how he collected newspaper clippings about Emmanuel's fights, carefully gluing them to the pages and writing proud comments next to each photo and news item. He had created a detailed archive of his son's career, documenting each victory, each title won, each moment of glory, as if he were the most dedicated trainer in the world. A particularly touching section revealed that Rosalio had learned to use computers at a cheap internet cafe just to access videos of Manny's fights online. He described in detail his reactions to each combat, analyzing his son's technique with the trained eye of someone who had studied boxing for years. His observations were surprisingly technical and accurate, showing he had become a true student of the sport just to stay connected to Emmanuel's world. The diary also documented nights when Rosalio watched fights in popular bars and restaurants, blending in with the crowd of Filipino fans who celebrated each Pacquiao victory as if it were a national victory. He wrote about how his heart almost exploded with pride when he saw other people celebrating his son, and how he had to control his emotions to not reveal his true identity. These were bittersweet moments where he could share in the collective pride, but had to keep to himself the deepest pride of being the champion's father. Rosalio had developed the habit of writing letters to Manny after each important fight. Letters he never sent but kept between the diary's pages. These letters were full of paternal advice, words of encouragement, and expressions of love he wished he could speak personally. Queen Elizabeth found dozens of these unsent letters, each revealing the depth of paternal love that had been forced into silence by life circumstances. As Manny's fame grew internationally, Rosalio documented how he felt seeing his son become not just a champion, but a national hero and inspiration to millions of people around the world. He wrote about how he had always believed Emmanuel was special, but had never imagined that specialness would reach such grandiose proportions. Each entry showed a father who had sacrificed his physical presence, but had never stopped being emotionally present in his son's extraordinary journey. As Manny reached the peak of his career, Rosalio's diary entries became more reflective and laden with regret. He wrote long passages questioning whether he had made the right decision in distancing himself from the family, especially now that he saw how his son had become not just a great boxer, but also a man of exemplary character. The pages revealed the pain of a father who wondered if his presence could have made Emmanuel's journey even more special, or if his direct guidance could have avoided some of the challenges his son faced alone. Their 2008 entry, written after one of Manny's greatest victories, showed Rosalio struggling against the growing desire to reveal himself and try to re-establish contact with the family. He described how he had spent hours standing in front of the house where he knew Emmanuel lived, gathering courage to knock on the door but always giving up at the last moment. The fear of not being well received, of causing embarrassment to his famous son, or of being seen as opportunistic paralyzed him, even when his heart screamed to embrace the son who had become his greatest source of pride. The diary also revealed how Rosalio had aged in silence, documenting health problems he preferred to face alone rather than become a burden to the family he had left behind. He wrote about back pain from years of heavy work, about sleepless nights thinking about grandchildren he had never properly known, and about the growing weight of loneliness he had chosen to carry. His words showed a man who daily paid the emotional price of his past decisions, but who still believed he had made the right choice for everyone's good. Entire pages were dedicated to requests for forgiveness he wished he could make personally, especially to Jinky and to the grandchildren he had missed the chance to see grow up. Rosalio wrote about how he imagined what it would be like to be a present grandfather, about the advice he would like to give, about the stories he would like to tell about these children's father when he was small. Each word revealed a man who carried immense love, but had convinced himself that this love was better expressed through distance than through presence. The reflections became even deeper when Rosalio wrote about the legacy he would like to leave, even knowing he might never have the opportunity to transmit it directly. He documented life lessons learned through decades of hard work and sacrifice, values about family, perseverance, and humility that he hoped would somehow reach Emmanuel and his descendants. The diary became, on these pages, a desperate attempt to immortalize his presence through words, since his physical presence had been voluntarily sacrificed years before. Queen Elizabeth finally reached the diary's last entries, dated just months before her discovery. In these final pages, Rosalio had made a decision that would change everything. He had decided it was time to try re-establishing contact with the family, regardless of the consequences. His handwriting was more tremulous, revealing his advanced age, But his words were firm and determined. He wrote about how life was too short to continue carrying alone all that love and all those unspoken words. The most recent entry, dated just 2 weeks earlier, revealed that Rosalio had finally gathered courage to write a real letter to Manny, not one of the imaginary letters he used to write, but a true letter he intended to deliver personally. He had spent days writing and rewriting this letter, trying to find the right words to explain decades of absence and silent love. In the diary, he confessed his fears about how he would be received, but also his determination not to leave this world without trying to reconcile with the son he had never stopped loving. The diary revealed that Rosalio had been living modestly in a small house on Manila's outskirts, supporting himself with occasional gardening work for elderly neighbors. He had chosen to stay relatively close to the family, even while maintaining distance, as if wanting to be available in case he was ever sought or needed. His last entries showed a man who had found relative peace with his past choices, but now felt the time had come to take the final step toward reconciliation. Queen Elizabeth realized her grandfather had hidden the diary in the attic during one of his secret visits to the house, probably hoping someone in the family would eventually find it. It was his way of ensuring his story would be told, even if he couldn't tell it personally. The last pages contained detailed instructions on where to find him, almost as if he knew the diary would be discovered and would serve as a bridge between his silent past and a possible future of family reunion. The last entry was simply devastating in its simplicity. If someone is reading this, know that I never stopped loving you all. Each day away was a day of longing, but also a day of pride for what Emmanuel became. I hope there's still time to say personally everything I wrote on these pages. Queen Elizabeth closed the diary with tears streaming down her face, knowing she had discovered not just her family's lost story, but also the location of a grandfather who was still alive and waiting for a second chance. With her heart beating fast and the diary firmly clutched in her hands, Queen Elizabeth ran to her father, finding him in his private training room, where Manny still maintained his physical form even after official retirement. She couldn't find adequate words to explain her discovery, so she simply extended the diary to him, watching as his expression changed from curiosity to complete shock when he recognized the familiar handwriting on the worn cover. The silence that followed was loaded with decades of unanswered questions and unprocessed emotions. Manny took the diary with trembling hands, his tears beginning to fall before he even opened the first page. As he read the first passages, years of hurt and perceived abandonment began transforming into understanding and admiration for the paternal sacrifice he had never known. Each page revealed a new layer of truth, showing a father who had loved intensely but sacrificed his presence for the family's prosperity. Queen Elizabeth watched in silence as her father, the man who had faced the greatest adversaries in the ring without showing fear, cried like a child upon discovering he had never been abandoned, just protected in a way he hadn't been able to understand at the time. When they arrived at the address mentioned in the diary's last pages, father and daughter found a simple but well-kept little house, with a small garden where tropical flowers grew in organized rows. Rosalio was there, older and bent by time, but still recognizable by the eyes that had transmitted so much love through written words. The moment of reunion was beyond anything words could describe. 3 generations of the Pacquiao family embraced in the simple garden, while decades of separation dissolved in tears of forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love. Rosalio, with his voice choked by emotion and years of silence, finally managed to express personally all the words he had kept for so long. He spoke about how he had watched every one of Manny's fights, about how he had cried with pride at each victory, about how he had prayed every night for the safety and happiness of the son he had loved from a distance. Manny, in turn, managed to express not just forgiveness, but gratitude for the strength and determination that childhood difficulties had given him, recognizing that his father's sacrifice had contributed to shaping the character that made him not just a great boxer, but a better man. In the days that followed, the Pacquiao family was completely reunited for the first time in decades, with Rosalio finally getting to properly know his grandchildren and having the opportunity to share his stories and wisdom directly. The diary that had served as a silent confessional for so many years now became the catalyst for a new phase of family life, where the love that had always existed could finally be expressed freely. Queen Elizabeth watched her father and grandfather talking in the garden at sunset, knowing that her casual discovery in the attic had given her family the most precious gift of all, the opportunity to transform years of separation into a solid foundation for new years of union, understanding, and openly shared love.